There's a set of footprints in Tanzania, preserved in volcanic ash for 3.6 million years. Two individuals walking upright, side by side, on legs that shouldn't have worked that way yet. No tools nearby. No obvious reason. Just two ancient humans walking long before anyone could explain why that mattered. We're still trying to figure out what made them stand up in the first place. Here's the version of the story you probably learned somewhere. Ancient apes stood up to see over tall grass on the savannah. Or they stood up to free their hands for tools. Or they stood up because it looked cooler, evolutionarily speaking. Clean story. Tidy narrative. Mostly wrong. The real explanation is messier, slower, and honestly more interesting than anything you got in a textbook. And it starts not with an ape deciding to stand up, but with a forest disappearing out from under her feet. Let's go back. Not 4 million years. Further, around 10 million years ago, most of what would become East Africa was dense, wet, unbroken forest canopy. Life was good if you were an ape. Food overhead, cover from predators, no reason whatsoever to touch the ground if you could help it. Our ancestors at this point looked nothing like Laetoli footprints. They looked like chimpanzees. Knuckle-walking, tree-dwelling, built for branches, not ground. Then the climate started to shift. Slowly, over millions of years, not overnight, not dramatically, but relentlessly. East Africa began to dry out. The dense forest fragmented into patches, separated by grassland, separated by open, exposed, predator-rich terrain. This wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was a long, grinding environmental squeeze. And it created a problem that no ape had faced before at this scale. How do you get from one patch of trees to another when the space between them is dangerous, hot, and offers nowhere to hide? This is where the walking upright to see over grass theory gets it backwards. Standing up didn't help early hominins spot predators from a distance in tall grass. It's the opposite. Standing up made them dramatically more visible to predators in open terrain. A four-legged animal moving low and fast through grass is harder to spot than a slow, upright biped silhouetted against the horizon. If visibility to predators were the deciding factor, standing up should have gotten our ancestors killed, not saved. So if it wasn't about seeing predators, what was it actually about? The leading theory today, supported by a growing body of fossil and environmental evidence, is that bipedalism wasn't about seeing further. It was about energy. Specifically, it was about the cost of getting from tree to tree in a fragmenting forest. Here's the thing nobody explains well. Knuckle-walking is expensive, genuinely, metabolically expensive. Chimpanzees walking on all fours burn roughly 4 times more energy per mile than a human walking upright covers the same distance. 4 times. That's not a small efficiency gap. That's the difference between a commute you can do every day and one that leaves you exhausted and vulnerable by the time you arrive. For an ape living entirely inside a forest canopy, this inefficiency barely mattered. You weren't covering long distances on the ground. You were swinging, climbing, occasionally dropping down to cross a short gap. But once the forest started breaking into disconnected patches, the ground stopped being an occasional inconvenience and became the primary route between food sources. And now that 4 times energy penalty wasn't a footnote. It was the difference between thriving and starving. An ape that could cover that same distance using less energy, even a little less, had more calories left over for everything else. Reproduction. Raising offspring. Surviving lean seasons. Evolution doesn't care about looking impressive. It cares about calories in versus calories out, repeated across millions of individuals over millions of years. And upright walking, awkward and slow as it looks compared to a sprinting predator, was radically more fuel efficient for long-distance travel across open, fragmented terrain. This is a genuinely strange thing to sit with. The reason you're not still knuckle-walking isn't heroism. It isn't intelligence. It's a multi-million-year efficiency audit conducted by natural selection, 1 calorie at a time. Now, here's something that almost nobody talks about when this topic comes up. Bipedalism came with catastrophic costs, and evolution paid them anyway. Let's start with the obvious one. Standing upright exposes the entire front of the body: throat, chest, abdomen, groin. A 4-legged animal presents a much smaller, harder target to a predator's opening strike. Early bipedal hominins were slower than a sprinting predator and more exposed than a quadruped fleeing the same threat. From a pure predator avoidance standpoint, standing up was close to suicidal. Then there's childbirth, and this is where the story gets genuinely brutal. The pelvis had to reshape itself dramatically to support an upright, two-legged gait, narrowing the birth canal in the process. At almost exactly the same evolutionary window, hominin brains started trending larger, which meant bigger skulls trying to pass through a smaller opening. This is not a minor design conflict. This is one of evolution's most vicious trade-offs, and it's the specific reason human childbirth is more dangerous, more painful, and more likely to require assistance than childbirth in essentially any other primate. Every other great ape gives birth relatively easily, alone, without help. Human mothers, for most of our history, needed other people present just to survive labor. Read that again. An entire evolutionary lineage accepted a body plan that made giving birth measurably more dangerous because the energy savings from walking upright outweighed that cost over enough generations. That's not a small trade. That's evolution making a brutal calculation and deciding the math still worked out in bipedalism's favor. And it's not just birth and predation. Upright posture also introduced back problems, joint stress, and circulatory issues that quadrupeds simply don't deal with in the same way. Your lower back pain has a 4-million-year-old origin story, and the short version is, your ancestors made a trade, and you're still paying the installment. So now we have a body plan that was slower, more exposed to predators, and more dangerous to give birth with. And evolution kept it anyway, generation after generation, for millions of years. That should tell you something about how enormous the energy efficiency payoff must have actually been. Let's talk about those Laetoli footprints again, because they tell us something the theories alone can't. Discovered in Tanzania in the late 1970s, preserved in a layer of volcanic ash that hardened into rock, these footprints date to roughly 3.6 million years ago. Two individuals, walking side by side, likely a third smaller set of prints trailing slightly behind. And critically, the gait pattern preserved in that ash is already recognizably human. Heel strike first, weight rolling forward through the foot, push off from the big toe. This is not a transitional, half-upright shuffle. This is a functioning bipedal walk, already refined, already efficient, already fully committed. Here's why that matters. These footprints predate stone tools by roughly 1 million years. They predate any evidence of significant brain expansion. Whoever left these prints was walking upright, competently and completely, long before the freed hands for tool use theory says they should have needed to. The tools came later. The big brains came later. The upright walking came first, driven by environmental pressure and energy efficiency, not by some clever plan to eventually invent spears. This flips the popular narrative on its head. We tend to imagine evolution as a forward-looking process, upright walking as a stepping stone deliberately taken toward tool use and intelligence. But the fossil record doesn't support that story. Bipedalism happened first, for reasons that had nothing to do with tools or brains. The tools and the brains came millions of years later, built on top of a body plan that was already walking upright for entirely different reasons. Evolution didn't plan ahead. It just kept whatever worked well enough, right now, in that specific dying forest. Now here's something that gets almost zero coverage outside specialist literature. Standing upright didn't just change locomotion. It rewired thermoregulation, and that change might have mattered just as much as the energy savings. Picture the equatorial sun directly overhead in open grassland. A quadruped presents its entire back to that sun for hours at a time. A biped presents only the crown of the head and shoulders to direct overhead sunlight, dramatically reducing the surface area exposed to peak solar radiation. Standing up, in other words, functions as a built-in parasol. This pairs with another change that happened around the same evolutionary window, the loss of body hair and the explosion of sweat glands across human skin. Humans have somewhere between 2 and 4 million sweat glands, a genuinely absurd number compared to other primates. And this combination, upright posture reducing solar exposure plus dramatically improved evaporative cooling, allowed early hominins to remain physically active during the hottest parts of the day when most predators were resting in shade. This is a real advantage that gets almost no attention. While big cats and other apex predators were forced into inactivity during peak heat, upright, sweat-cooled hominins could keep moving, keep foraging, keep covering distance. Bipedalism wasn't just about efficient walking. It was part of a broader package that let early humans occupy a punishing daytime niche that most other large mammals in that environment simply couldn't tolerate. Before we go further, I want to mention something for anyone who wants to go even deeper into questions like this. I put together a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours covering everything we never get into here on YouTube. What they feared, how they actually communicated, what really hunted them, and a lot more, plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Links in the description if you want to go further down this rabbit hole. Now, back to the story. There's one more piece of this puzzle that rarely gets discussed, and it might be the most important one. Bipedalism didn't happen once. It happened as a long, messy, repeated experiment across multiple hominin lineages, most of which failed. The fossil record shows several different species experimenting with upright walking over millions of years, with varying degrees of commitment and success. Some, like early Australopithecines, walked upright on the ground but retained curved fingers and strong arms clearly adapted for climbing, suggesting they were hedging their bets, part-time bipeds still relying on trees as a backup option. Others committed further, losing much of that climbing anatomy entirely. This wasn't one clean lineage marching confidently from ape to human in a straight line. It was a branching, overlapping, repeatedly experimental process, with multiple bipedal or semi-bipedal species existing simultaneously, most of which eventually went extinct. We are the descendants of whichever specific branch happened to get the balance right, more efficient walking without losing too much else, adaptable enough to survive the specific environmental pressures of that specific stretch of shrinking African forest. This matters because it destroys the comfortable idea that upright walking was some inevitable evolutionary destiny, humanity's manifest path forward. It wasn't inevitable. It was one gamble among several competing gambles, playing out across different hominin populations over millions of years, most of which didn't pay off. We're not the result of evolution reaching for its obvious goal. We're the result of one particular experiment that happened to work well enough in one particular place at one particular time, while several close relatives tried their own versions and disappeared. So let's zoom out and put this all together. Around 10 million years ago, our ancestors lived comfortably in dense forest, with no real reason to walk upright. As East Africa's climate shifted and that forest fragmented into disconnected patches over millions of years, moving across open ground stopped being occasional and started being unavoidable. Walking on 2 legs was roughly 4 times more energy efficient than knuckle-walking the same distance, and in a world where every unnecessary calorie burned could mean the difference between surviving a lean season and not, that efficiency mattered enormously. The costs were severe. More exposure to predators. Dramatically more dangerous childbirth. New joint and back problems that persist to this day. And evolution paid those costs anyway, because the long-term energy math still worked in bipedalism's favor. The Laetoli footprints show us a species that had already fully committed to this trade by 3.6 million years ago, walking with a modern, efficient gait, millions of years before tools or bigger brains arrived to justify the decision after the fact. And it wasn't a single clean lineage moving confidently toward that destiny. It was several competing experiments, most of which failed, with only one branch getting the balance right. Here's what I think is the actual point of all this. We tend to imagine our ancestors standing up as some kind of triumphant, forward-looking moment, apes reaching toward their destiny as humans. That's not what happened. What actually happened is that a dying forest forced a desperate, expensive, dangerous adaptation onto a population that had no